Welcome back to the 21 Convention 2017 10-year anniversary live event in Orlando, Florida. Our next speaker is a very good friend of mine. He's not just a friend, he's a veteran alumni speaker, one of the most veteran of this entire event. He has taken it upon himself to actually be the ambassador for the new speakers at this event that we have so many of. So your next speaker is Socrates, and he has actually followed this event since he's followed me since before the inception. We used to argue and stuff with each other back in the day on internet forums and got into it here and there. But he's followed this convention since the beginning, and he has been instrumental in bringing it to where it is today and where it will go in the future, as you guys will find out on Saturday. So again, his name's Socrates. He's at manningupsmart.com, and he's an excellent friend of myself and the 21 Convention itself. Come on stage, buddy.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm Socrates, and I help people understand and navigate the sexual marketplace. I do that by using a cross-disciplinary approach of combining anthropology, history, sociology, and then psychology to influence how and why we make decisions the way we do. Professionally, I'm an architect, and part of my education, training, development, and professional responsibilities is leading and orchestrating cross-professional disciplinary teams, civil engineers, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, all together to create visions and structures for clients in often very harsh natural and social environments. I leverage that background and those transferable skills to my influence with clients and individuals dealing in dating environments, their relationships, their marriages, to understand their position within the sexual marketplace and what they can expect from that. Many of my critics cannot speak to about many of the things I'll profess within relationships, particularly in today's age. And there's a number of reasons for that. Many is because they have no ability to do so. Okay, right or wrong, they just lack the fundamental ability. The other is, like myself, may have had gross concerns about today's sexual marketplace and the sexual political nature of our culture. The threats are real. They're a concern. Okay? And in many ways, I understand people not wanting to engage in relationships, particularly long-term, where there is such a threat exposure. Ultimately, I think your destination is going to be chosen and driven by your values. All right? And so it's why I'm willing to stand up here and profess many of the things that I do. Today we're going to be, this week in this convention, we're going to be talking a lot about red pill awareness, red pill culture, and many people don't know and understand it. In many ways, it's a euphemism based on the cultural movie The Matrix, in which a hero was given an opportunity of free choice and a rational choice to choose to view the world as it is rather than the way he perceived it to be. The blue pill, the alternative choice, was that he was to remain ignorant. He would be unaware of the realities around him, okay? And he would be able to live his life in a fantasy world, okay? The issue with the red pill choice is that you're making a choice of viewing the world as it is, as opposed to the world that could be or the way you believe it should be. In many ways, the philosophy is kind of summed up here with a Russian proverb. It's better to be slapped with the truth than kissed with a lie. And it's a fairly simple, straightforward approach. Everybody kind of thinks, okay, we do this until it becomes a sense of reality. Nobody likes, trying to swallow a jagged truth. And in many ways, this will be the first start one. Nature will win. It's a simple statement. Your consequentiality is debatable. I'm kind of reminded of Robert Frost's thought that he was able to surmise everything he knew about life in 3 simple words. Life goes on. Okay? You'll hear it saying it in a number of ways. Rollo, I think, has written a blog post, famously saying, nature doesn't care. And it doesn't. Okay? These are harsh realities. This is a harsh truth to accept. We're all due to a grave. There's no doubt about this. The only promise in life is that you're going to die. The question is what do you do in the interim? And that becomes a defining element of your life. The summation of the entire time. What did you do? What did you accomplish? What did you stand for? How did that drive your life? And these are going to be some of the things that we discuss within today's events, and particularly mine. There's an elephant in the room when we talk about red pill community. For a community so fascinated with swallowing truths and having others face that, what is the reality that they're not facing or addressing? And it's a concerning one. It's one of the reasons why, while I'm aware of it, I don't fully embrace a lot of it. Because I don't like how they're viewing the far end. And it's simply this. Biology commands you to have children. Your humanity should command you to raise them. That is very much going to be a red pill for the red pill community. It is something they're not going to want to swallow. It's something each of you are going to have to look at and evaluate in your own life. Do you take the red pill and embrace and prepare for that? Or do you take the blue pill and live the life you want to believe? The life that this doesn't matter. That you're not obligated as a biological species to do the following. The reality is, you can address that in a number of ways. In fear, anxieties, you're not prepared. Or you can sit down and say, look, I know I'm going to be facing this, and work at it, bit by bit. What I see a lot of times are people that are avoiding responsibilities, accountability, okay, for any number of reasons. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be very, very demanding. It's going to be incredibly difficult in its own right. Add that to the cultural and social impositions that we place on culture today, and you sit down and say, I understand why you wouldn't. The problem, though, is that when we get wrapped up into the narcissism of now, we don't really get anywhere. It's short-term thinking, it's short-term processing for long-term ramifications. And there's tremendous dangers here for the individuals, for society on a whole. Ultimately, individually, you're going to have an individual response. It'll be up to you. Ultimately, your sex drive is just the beginning of your biological imperative. Your biological imperatives are there to make sure that the species is able to survive and reproduce. Your sex drive, your desire to have sex, is just the starting point for all this. It's not the end result. If you don't go through that process, you're not going to end up being whole. You're going to live a stunted human existence. You can build a wall of facts between you and this reality. And God knows I had gone through that process. You can see that with a lot of the presentations I've had done previously, where I was very concerned about today's cultural marketplace. I was very concerned about my ability to be a father, to be a man. What does that mean? How do I deal with that? But I was actively pursuing and investigating those things. You can build a wall of facts between you and reality. The problem is biology doesn't care. That doesn't change biology. Life will go on. Nature will win, and nature doesn't care. It compels you to reproduce. It compels you to become a father, to become a parent. And that is an essential element of our humanity. Nature also abhors a barren womb. The same way it abhors masculine impotency. Your choice to be so struck or so in fear of your biological imperatives is willful impotence. And that's a choice you make. It is important to reflect upon these sort of things and to realize what you're doing. And unfortunately, culturally, we've scared ourselves limp. And unfortunately, a pharmaceutical blue pill won't be the solution here. For any of you who think, hey, Sock, I'm going to age, and as a man, I can still produce sperm and have children at 90. And the reality is you're right, you can. But there are genetic ramifications to it. There's an element of sperm decay associated with it. And your offspring will bear those risks and bear those medical abnormalities. That would be nature's way of saying, your jizz ain't right. Okay, nature doesn't approve. And it gets worse. If you're taking a lot of this red pill wisdom and you're delaying these sort of decisions and you're pushing that decision making out, you're probably not going to mate and pair with somebody within your own social demographic age. You're not going to be dating, somebody who's in their 60s when you're having kids at 60. No, you're going to do the things that are being taught and cultured, a lot of the things that we promote here, of getting the best value you can get. And that's going to be typically a 15 to 20 plus year span between age groups. The problem with that is there are heightened medical risks associated with that. When you take an old sperm factory and mate it up with a new egg warehouse, nature says, no, sir. Your medical risks for abnormalities are greater than that of a single woman at 40 having her first job. Vastly more dangerous. And by the way, because men's health are so important in this culture, we're advertising that fact. We're letting men know, right? You've heard about this constantly in the news, right? So these are the forms where we have to be able to talk about men's health, men's sexuality, men's culture, and make each other aware. Women hit a biological wall. We're fairly well known about that. So do men. It doesn't happen the same time period, on a different arc, but it does happen. And the ramifications, culturally and personally, are no less significant. Don't think you have your entire life to kick a decision down the road and at the last moment you can change your mind. You can, but you're running a tremendous risk in doing so. And if you're concerned about your genetic legacy, what you leave behind, what you contribute to humanity, put your best foot forward. Think about where this should be taking place and when. When are you at your prime? Because ultimately, past your sexual peak, every day, every anniversary, you become increasingly insignificant to the point of your death. The other one, and I happen to really particularly love this slide, and it's based on showing human evolution. Of the 3 billion years of evolutionary sex, and this is just showing 14 million years, hominid evolution has been terribly successful. And what I want you to do right now is understand that we've had approximately 200,000 years of just human evolution. Think about right now, 500,000 generations behind you of your history, and you're the living, breathing edge of that humanity, that edge of your family lineage that's 500,000 generations deep. I find that staggering, just really almost unfathomable. And then if you look at that sort of scale of picture and come to the conclusion, sorry man, you just can't get it done. You can't continue that legacy, that lineage, because society got in the way, because culture got in the way, because of, I don't know what, feminism. I understand the threats, I understand the risks, but at a certain point, your obligation is to get over that and to be successful. I guarantee you, this line, more people there had a more difficult time than we did. We can't be lazy and weak about facing the challenges of our day and age. We have family history here. You're living proof of it. Honor that existence. I also want to recognize that the forces and challenges that we face are very, very real. I don't want to diminish that by any stretch of the imagination just with this presentation. I've spoken at length about men's rights, about divorce law. We will speak at length this week about relationships, the dating environment, the cultural environment in which we stand. These are very real constructs. And if you're going to try to attempt to develop a relationship, trying to develop a family, my suggestion to you is remember the fable of the 3 little pigs. Do not build your relationship out of the wishful thinking of straw. Nature and human influence, unconstrained, will utterly destroy. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a hurricane come through. I guarantee you that hurricane, as much damage and how blusterous it was nothing compared to what going through a divorce proceeding is like. How your life is torn up. Everything's absolutely in disarray. These things are preventable. If we look to it, we train, we do the appropriate behavioral modifications, and we understand the underlying issues going on within relationships and relationship structures. When we talk about mating strategies, the human animal is terribly complex. At the base of it, we have 3 different brain structures as we evolved. The most primal is the limbic system, the hindbrain. That's kind of the lizard brain. It's the lizard response. It's a fight or flight. It's a survival mode. You can breed using mammalian breeding strategy, and that's completely works. Okay, and essentially it's nothing more than fuck, spray, and skedaddle. Okay, but the quality output is incredibly low. The parental input on that is incredibly low. That's a terribly low bar for humanity. The secondary challenge is the mammalian complex, the midbrain. And this is where you're going to actually sit down and say where we have these pair bonding influences, these biological urges to actually mate with somebody and kind of have a longer term relationship with them, stay with them for a period of time, and wishful thinking along those lines. You can do that too. And you're going to find in the red pill community there's a lot to be said about this. And a lot of it's going to be negative. Because unconstrained human nature just absolutely runs amok. There's no rules, okay? And it becomes very, very dangerous. And if you're not prepared for that, look out. You're going to suffer the consequences of it. The third one is actually used in our forebrain, the greatest brain we've ever had. We're the only creature with that much of a developed brain. And that is a very human element to us, which really what makes us human. And to utilize that knowledge to prepare us, to train, to develop ourselves, in response to everything we know that should be coming, the things that we've seen historically, the behavioral patterns, and prepare us for the challenges ahead. That is going to be a completely unique human construct. I'm going to advocate you'll also have better rewards out of here. You'll have a better quality life out of here. You're going to die happy. You're going to die fulfilled. Why? Because you're going to be complete. You're going to do everything your body naturally, biologically commands you to do, and you're going to do it with all the preconception of forethought, of planning and initiation and execution. And you're going to be surrounded with that knowledge. You're going to go to your grave knowing you completed yourself. If we have these biological imperatives, how does it play out with sexual criteria? How do we choose? What's driving those factors? Biological drivers are, I stated earlier, that they're unconstrained, okay, naturally. And for men and women, they're the same, okay? It's true for both sexes, not just women. It's true for both sexes, okay? And it's a result-oriented system. It doesn't care. It just wants results, okay? Which means it says the means and methods of occurring this is discretionary. Murder, rape, cheating, cuckoldry, all fair game in nature. Not civilized. Doesn't make it human. We do it. But it's not what we want to promote. It's not what we want to exemplify. Right? But if you don't know our base biological nature, you can't guard against it. You cannot prepare yourself for it. And you need to be aware of what these things are. In human beings, where men and women are the same, the cluster traits are similar. Because we're the same species. We share more similarities than we do differences. And primarily, we have survival traits, seduction traits, and then provision traits as far as the things that we're looking for a sexual mate. And again, these are going to be similar where we're similar. Where we differ, you're going to have sex-specific specialization. And they're going to be acute. They play out. And this is another huge area in which the red pill community very much researches, develops, and actually, publishes material, warning men so they can understand exactly what's going on. Why is this happening? All right. For women, this sexual criteria is called hypergamy. Men have it too, but it's not hypergamy, it's hypogamy. It's the other side of the coin. All right. And again, where they differ, they're going to be sex-based, based on environmental conditions naturally occurring in our evolutionary history, including much of the social constructs during that evolutionary history. So this will date back thousands of years of human evolution and development. imprinting upon our brain structures and how we respond biologically to sexual criteria. For women, these are the primary physical traits that they have. For survival, her dimorphism she's looking for is the physical state, the size and address of a man. She's also looking at his fitness and in his health. Okay? Seduction, she's looking for deliberate sexual enticement, provocation, and here's the key. Remember this one. Execution. She's looking for an operator. She's looking for a guy that will come in, squeeze the trigger, and put rounds on target. She's looking for a man of action here. And that's going to be a biological response. The third one is going to be the ones you're going to be really familiar with, the provisional things. She's looking for a man of standing. She's going to be looking for wealth. She's looking for fame. And she's looking for power. The ability to provide over long term for herself and her children and offspring. These are all natural. Okay, you see it played out. Men, on the other hand, have the same general criteria. He's looking for health, fitness, and vitality. Personality, spirit, energy. It's going to, for breeding purposes and survival. He's looking for the similar type things as far as seduction, deliberate, elements of sexual enticement, provocation, and then accessibility. He's looking for somebody who's willing to have sex, not fight for it, but willing to have sex. The third one is obviously we're dealing with provisions, youth, fertility, and vitality. Okay? And these are going to drive masculine behaviors. These are going to drive men in their choices in women. When they're naturally ordered, hypergamy and hypogamy are matched for each other. They're meant to be. This is a success model. This isn't a system at war with itself. When they're naturally balanced, they're compatible. Okay, this is called partnering. And biologically, nature wants us to be compatible to survive and produce. It's when we get this out of balance that things go astray. Okay? The key on this is when we look at a male's need, she has to overcome his hypergamous acceptance criteria for commitment. Okay? And essentially, when she is evaluating him, he has to overcome her hypergamous nature, and she becomes a gatekeeper of sex, right? For that measure of acceptance. Obviously she's controlling that. So the controlling factor for sex is going to be with the woman. For the male, it's the other way around. She has to overcome his hypergamous commitment level. And that means he's the gatekeeper for relationships. Another way of saying this is women have to be compelled to freely copulate and have sex. Men have to be compelled to commit. All right. We've talked a little bit about the sexual criteria. How do you manage these things? How do you manage hypergamy? How do you manage hypogamy? What does that mean? Okay, and how do you actually do it? It's one thing to be aware of it, but how does this actually play out? There's a number of combinations here. Okay, we have three major criteria: survival, seduction, provision, and a number of sub-criteria. The interesting thing is nature likes diversity because it spreads the gene pool out. It helps ensure survival, and there's a number of biological responses for this. And what you have here is any number of combinations that make up you, and you. You're all going to be different based on any number of these combinations. Any one of these work. There's no one prototype. There's no one singular human prototype. The problem here, though, is they're not weighted equally. Nature likes a particular order. And the answer is found in the definition. This is management of sexual selection. The key word, sexual. What makes you think sexual components aren't going to be weighted super heavy here? In fact, sex is almost everything when it comes to sexual selection. It literally is the lead. And so when we talk about this, you need to make sure you're organizing those effectively up front. All right? We can look at those standards. We know of wealthy men who have been cheated on. We know of powerful men who have been cheated on. Okay? We know of famous men who are raising children that are not their own, okay, through cuckoldry. We know any number of these categories who have been literally outcompeted sexually by their inferiors in the other two categories because the emphasis was on physical stature, fitness, and an ability to seduce and execute. That's all player status, isn't it? That's where all the pickup guys are all coming from. So if you're going to look and emphasize something, make sure you hit that. Another way of looking at it is I'm Exhibit A. I got this shit wrong. To date, I'm still getting it wrong. I'm grossly obese. I'm standing here at 6'2", 300 pounds. Who here thinks if I dropped 100 pounds, my sexual market value wouldn't go through the roof? What did I do? Thanks, guys. Really, I really appreciate that. But the reality is I took this notion of self-sacrifice. It was cultured, it was ingrained. I joined a number of organizations where that was paramount. It's what men do, right? It's part of who we are. And so what I ended up doing when I was young and fit, I sacrificed my time, my energy. I took on a tremendous amount of stress. And I didn't make room for myself and my fitness and my health. And things slowly progressed from there. And it got worse. But I was a smart dude. I could sit down and say, I need to spend more time in the gym, or I could go the cheaper, shorter, faster route, which is what? I can learn game. I could learn game, and you sit down, and what's essential of game? The first one's like, I don't know, instead of slouching around, I could stand up straight. That'll increase my sexual market value. People start noticing me, start taking up emotional space. And so you start doing these things. God, thank God, I actually have a beautiful face I could work with, to compensate for this body, and so, I can guarantee it, one of my friends is a professional cyclist. He and I stand next to together. He's going to get the attention sexually. And he's a great friend, but man, can I outgame him? Okay, but I was doing it wrong. Okay, and I'm suffering my health effects because of that. So even though I'm standing here to sit down and, I'm kind of supposed to be a thought leader, I'm telling you, we get it wrong as well. I'm an exhibit of this. I want to make sure you guys don't make the same mistakes I do, because it's going to be vastly harder for me to recorrect the ship. And it's not a matter of just getting in shape. It's making sure my entire life is in support of that. Okay, and what led me to here was the fact my life didn't support that. So I want to make sure you guys are aware of that and where the emphasis is, and it's not evenly weighted. If we're talking sexual criteria, you need to lean heavy into those. Don't think your earning potential, fame, power, wealth, notoriety is going to make a difference. It will. It'll make a tremendous difference if you have all those other things in place as well. All right, hypergamy management. We're going to be dealing with what happens, or how do you deal with hypergamy, a woman's criteria for sexual selection. Let's start with the very basic. What happens when you don't trigger it? She shows no interest, right? You don't even exist. You're invisible. I think a lot of the guys here understand that. I think this organization, as Anthony explained before, was centered on that initially because that was a major issue. Okay? So you're going to have to trigger sexual selection if you actually want to have a biological response that's legitimate. And it's a difference between, you can't rationalize sexuality. She may be able to sit down and say, yeah, he's a great guy, he's a wonderful provider and everything else. And rationally, she'll say, he'll do. And she'll use her cerebral cortex to come to that decision. Biologically, though, you want to be that hell yeah guy, okay, that she just sits down and goes, that one. Okay? Sex is the glue that binds us together. You want to trigger that. You want to emphasize that when you're able to. I'm not saying that's the only thing you should be doing, but fundamentally at a basic level, we're deserving of that. That's our lineage. This is our inheritance. This is our birthright. Make sure we're focusing in on that. The second thing is, and a lot of guys here will be able to testify to this too, and which is tremendous amount of fodder for the red pill community. What happens when you fail to maintain her hypergamous interest? She will fill that void in its place. And it's natural and proper for her to do it. How awful is that? You got divorced for a reason. You let yourself go, you let your marriage go, you let her interests go. That's going to be brutal. I will say something else though. If you're going to be in a relationship with somebody, first thing you should be looking for, one of the first things, is she aware of her hypergamous nature? Does she even know that word exists, and what does it mean? If she has no idea what her natural sexual selection and biological impulses are sexually, if she's not even aware of it, introduce her to your friends. Get her out of her life. I tell people to actually identify problems as they advance to you so you can avoid them. You just sidestep the shit. Okay? Learn to do that with people in your life. You'll save yourself a tremendous amount of trouble, a tremendous amount of anxiety and drama. The second is a follow-up to it. If she's aware of these elements in her natural selection criteria and how that plays out biologically in the relationship, make sure she owns that. It's her responsibility to control her hypergamous interests. Okay, women have no problem telling you to control your dick in a relationship. Stop staring at other women. Return the favor. Okay, it's called safeguarding. Make sure as an individual, she has the agency to safeguard the relationship she wants by not letting her natural animalistic instinct run fucking amok. And I'm going to tell you guys to the same thing too. Don't destroy your marriages by chasing a little trim on the fucking side. All right? No different here. But if you're going to be in a relationship, make sure she knows it. Make sure she has agency and she's going to actually implement strategies naturally to control herself. The other is, we're talking biologically. You're going to need to have a biological response. You have to speak the same language in which things are communicating. Having a rational response to a biological language, i.e., you're a great guy. Your amount of relationship equity in your relationship is going to save you against her biological impulses. Good luck. Nature doesn't care. Life will go on, and nature will win. This is where men get destroyed. This is where families are destroyed. This is where children are damaged. I think a lot of us understand this. I think a lot of us experience that. But you're going to have to answer it. And how do you answer that? It goes back to sexual selection. Make sure you're in shape. Make sure you're healthy. Make sure you're socially inclined. Make sure you're engaging sexually. Make sure you can entice her sexually. The other is make sure you're achieving. Make sure you're doing your male purpose of providing status, a measure of fame, notoriety in your life, or even within her. You have that responsibility to answer that. All right? The last two are also going to be distinct. You're going to need to lead the relationship. Why do I say that? It goes back to hypergamy. Remember when I said she needs somebody to execute on the sexual enticement? That's another way of saying she wants somebody who will establish initiative in starting the relationship. She wants somebody who will initiate and take the leadership role of these sort of things. That element of natural masculine assertiveness, confidence, and execution. It is biologically hardwired in. She's expecting you to lead. And when you don't, she'll fill the void. In another analogy, we talk about driving the bus. Your job is to drive the damn bus. If you're not driving the bus and your hands are off the wheel, she's going to reach over and grab it. That's going to be a dangerous situation in a number of ways. You definitely don't want somebody who's fighting you for that damn wheel. Okay, so screen and filter for that. The other is, on a rational basis, I have this really kind of strange thought. It's a belief system. I believe I own what I create. It's going to be simple. I own what I create. And if we're talking about relationships, who did all the work? Who is the individual that recognized signals of attraction, was responsible for initiating a response, engaging in reaction, going over and initiating conversation, leading that conversation, doing all the courtship rituals, pursuing the relationship, pursuing her, and actually establishing that relationship? That's yours. That's your obligation. I don't know very many women who actually expect to take on all those roles. And if they did, that relationship would be hers. If you own it, drive it. It's your responsibility. That's a rational argument to a biological reality. So two solid reasons. An emotional reason of saying, hey, look, it's her hypergamous interest and demands it. And the second area is a very rational point. You did every step to actually own it. The third is we also know the fact that women go through a hormonal response over a period of cycles. Okay? We know they ovulate. And science are going to report that her mood swings, not just mood, her interest sexually swings with that ovulation cycle. In many ways, when she's ovulating, she's going to demand a more aggressive and assertive alpha male. Right? In comparison, in addition, she's going to be disgusted with displays of vulnerability during this time period. And that's to ensure genetic selection of the best quality male at the right time when she's breeding. And if you're not aware of these cycles and how that plays out, it again can wreck your life. This is the time period in which most women will cheat, when most women go astray, when most women have one-night stands. You'll hear this in the pickup community. You start to identify it. If you're in a relationship, this is terribly useful information. I do it on a regular basis. I actually track my partner's cycle, not technically, but I understand where she's at in that swing. And I know during that time period, I manage it, and I actually accentuate my masculine side, my assertiveness. I don't sit down and ask her, hey, honey, do you want to go out to eat? What do you want? I don't know. I don't waffle around. A lot of times I don't give her a choice. Honey, we're going. Get in the car. Let's go. Where are we going? You'll see. I'm leading. I'm going to dominate. I'm going to display that. I'm just going to claw her, grab her in. Okay? I'll be assertive. I will tell her the most sexy word she's ever heard. No. Okay? And she'll get all upset. I'll sometimes just, out of nowhere, we'll be sitting in a chair, kind of chilling, and I'll just sneer at her and say the word no. Okay? Just to tease. And she knows. And at this point, she knows I'm doing this intentionally. She knows I'm doing this intentionally. And I have no problem telling her she's worth it. And she agrees. You can manage this cycle. I suggest you start incorporating that in your relationships. And we'll talk about other things you can do, how you time this sort of things. And so I think this is terribly important on how to manage hypergamy. Now, to be fair, there's a flip side to this coin. And interesting enough, I find this terribly fascinating that half my viewership are female. I just find that stunning when I primarily talk about men's issues. And so let's deal with this. And I think you guys will enjoy because you'll recognize some of it. I think it's also a lot more culturally known. What happens when women don't trigger a man's hypogamous interest? Oh, she exists, yeah. Don't get me wrong. She'll be a fuck buddy. Problem is, a condom is your glass slipper, isn't it? It's something you put on for a handsome stranger and you lose by the end of the night. Sweetheart, that's not a fairy tale. That's a horror story. Done for 10, 15, 20 years? You're okay with that? The secondary one is you actually triggered his commitment level. You got a guy to commit, but you don't maintain it. What happens then? I don't know. You don't want guys knowing about this organization. You don't want guys knowing about red community awareness, their sense of integrity and rights and what they should be able to have when you renegotiated the relationship. Not overtly, but by behavior. All right? You're going to be constantly looking over your shoulder because women know there is a constant stream of opportunity. Younger women who are younger, fitter, hotter, and free of all the emotional baggage you're carrying. And not only that, they're unencumbered by all the bullshit you brought him through in the relationship. You're showing him the door. You're almost pushing him through it. And so you have to respond to this by maintaining his interest sexually. One of the first things I'll tell women, when they want to control hypogamy, is learn that bad boys are for bad girls. I know, it's revolutionary in thought. If you want different, choose differently. You're the gatekeeper of sex. Guard that gate. Like men, women need to have a biological response to male biological language. How does that play off? You have to be a better solution to his perceived options. You have to be the best damn thing for that guy and make sure he knows it. You want to sit down and respond sexually. The survival elements, health, fitness, vitality. Nobody likes a Debbie Downer, okay? You also have to know the roles of sexual provocation and enticement, and then be accessible. Sexless marriages are empty. Sexless marriages are devoid of human connection. They ring hollow for a reason. And I'm not talking a drum here. All right? The last one, provision. Youth, fertility, and variety. This is for sexual selection. All right? Now, men still want variety. You can incorporate that in your relationship. But the difference here is if you're in a relationship, it's no longer just about sexual selection. You need to be able to have relationship-centric components to provision. We'll talk about that later. All right? Ultimately, we sit down and say the man is supposed to drive. It's his bus. He earned it. Okay? He created it. I'm going to tell you, your job is not just to follow. Your job isn't just to go along for the ride. Your job is to learn to dance. You are an active partner. And when we talk sexual displays, when we talk sexual relationships, we're talking about a degree of flair, we're talking about movement, we're talking about interest, keep an interest. Learn to dance. In the real world, not just metaphorically, learn to dance. Those skills and traits will transcend in your relationship in positive ways. Part of that is understanding how to enter a man's frame, his reality. Insisting that he has good frame and strong frame to be able to hold and guide you. And the other part is going to be the guidance. You're going to have to demand that he's a strong and good leader. That is something that a partner will do, okay? Ultimately, though, your hypergamy is going to demand this. There's a biological instinct linked to this, okay? And people will say, I'm sexist. No, I'm a realist. The science shows it. Not only that, the science shows repeatedly. It's not just a one-off thing. It conclusively just keeps repeating itself, and repeating itself. The problem is, politically, nobody wants to publish this, particularly universities today. 20 years ago, when I was going to, actually more than 20 years ago, I read a book called The Red Queen when it first came out. It was mandatory reading. It was scathing at the time. I don't think that book could be published today. Some of the information, even then, that they skirted around is not fit for your consumption to read. Right? Nobody wants to put money back to push this information out. It goes against the orthodoxy. It goes against the conventional cultural grain. But the information is out there. Right. The secondary one for women, you need to be worthy of commitment. Don't be flip-flop quality and expect to be treated like Louis Vuitton. It's just not going to happen. You have to be worthy of his commitment. Make sure you are. Ultimately, when you're not, the only metric you can actually improve on is your sexuality. Okay, and that's a vicious cycle, particularly as nature's not kind to anybody. We all age poorly. All right? And you're against a race on time and you're pressing sexual behavior with competing with younger, fitter, hotter women continuously. That is going to be comical. And you can see it in display. I can take you downtown tonight and I'll show you, absolutely displays of this. And it's nothing more than what we kind of, proverbially kind of look at as I Love Lucy in the chocolate factory, where there's this conveyor belt of chocolate and women are just trying to be hotter and hotter and hotter, and they literally start tripping over themselves. And it becomes a calamity. Unfortunately, unlike that TV show, it's not funny and it doesn't end well. I'm going to sit down and say women need to biologically respond, not verbally, but through behaviors. It's awesome when one woman will tell you, hey, I love you, I want to do these things, and respond that I'm quality. But ultimately, when a woman says, I'm a lady, she has to convince you of the fact and has to sell you the fact, not by her behaviors and presence, by wording. It's almost like looking at apartments, and when you see the word luxury, you can probably guarantee it's not. All right? The second one is, you can't be going around shaking the bad boy tree, and I know that your hypergamous interest wants that, and constantly shaking that bad boy tree, and somehow miraculously finding a good man fall out. Okay? And if a good man does fall out, he probably put himself there to actually get some attention, which means he's really not a good guy. He's clever, but he's not necessarily a good guy. But you have to be responsible. You have to have agency. Stop shaking the bad boy tree if you actually want positive results and positive relationships. Bad boys position themselves that way for a reason. The other is you're going to have to develop yourself. You're going to have to develop yourself hard in support of a relationship. And this is going to be kind of the ugly one. You're going to have to position yourself for a man to commit. Not only be worthy of that commitment, but ultimately for a man to fulfill his masculine duties, and which are typically what? To protect, to provide, and to raise a family. You're going to have to hit multiple criteria. You're going to have to be commitment worthy. You're going to have to be protection worthy, a woman worthy of protecting. Okay? You're also going to have to be a worthy woman to be able to provide. Why would a man want to over-provide for himself to provide for you if you're such low quality? Nobody wants a bum deal. Don't present one to the sexual marketplace. And the last one's terribly important. If you want somebody to be there to raise a family, you're really going to have to get his interest and sustain it. You're going to have to provide an answer to his fears, insecurities, and his biological needs and biological impulses to make all this work. How do you do that? How do you fill that void? If men are driving, and I'm telling you not to just sit and be riding shotgun, how do you do it? Now, this is kind of a joke. It's humorous, but it's serious, too. I'm going to sit down and say, it's sleep, dishes, belly, balls, and back. And this is homage to some friends in the audience. I heard it a while back, remember it, and I think it's worth resonating and saying again. And so when we look at these individually, sleep, we're talking about recovery and rejuvenation. Your relationship should be a safe place for him to go. If you're not ensuring that, he's going to seek it elsewhere. If he's out there providing, doing everything he needs to do masculine-wise, to do everything you want him to do relationship-wise, you need to be the safe space for him. And that's primarily going to start off with you cutting your bullshit. You being responsible for your own happiness, not encumbering upon him as well. I guarantee you, you don't feel his happiness is incumbent upon you. Step up, ladies. Second is going to be dishes. What's that symbolic of? Maintenance. How do you respect the things that he was able to provide? Okay? This is going to be terribly important. The things that he's been able to provide, are you able to maintain? And it sounds simple, but if you can't have a notion of maintenance ability within a relationship, you're not going to sustain that relationship. You have to be able to do that. And you see that by behavioral examples. Is she able to maintain things, or is she just wearing these things to failure? Another one is belly, nourishment, the art of the sandwich. Okay? I know it sounds kind of funny, but one feeds the man. The second, the act, feeds the relationship and the soul. Terribly important. When you know you're taken care of, you can be confident going forward. I know, for example, standing up here, that the film crew and the audio crew take care of me and their confidence and everything else so I can relax and to do the things I'm going to do up on stage. If I didn't have that security, that ability to nourish it, I'd be insecure. Make sure you're feeding the soul and the body of the relationship. Balls. Simply put, a well-drained man typically doesn't stray. More importantly than that, we're talking intimacy. We need intimacy and connection to be human and to have human relationships. Strangely enough, men view themselves in the reflection of the admiration and devotion of their partners and loved ones. I know as a father, I'm loved one. I can see my daughter and I come home and her eyes light up. I know I'm a good man. Okay? And that compels me to be a better man. Intimacy is terribly important. And it's not just a sexual act. It's how we regard and treat each other. Make sure you're feeding that. Make sure you're exhibiting that, particularly with the people you care about. Back. We're talking about loyalty. We're talking about commitment. We're talking about making sure you know this is a partnership in words and in deed. And I think in many cases there's something terribly, terribly powerful about this. And it's something that you don't hear often. When particularly culture doesn't support relationships, when families and friends are not necessarily supporting relationships, how often do you hear it? Baby, I got your back. Take the risk. Be confident. Stand up. Be a man. I'm here for you. These are powerful things. These are things that will drive a man to want to commit. Or the other way around. don't provide these, you're going to lose the man. You're going to lose the man, you're going to lose the relationship, you're going to lose the family. And as a consequence, as a society, we all lose. Biological imperatives. The interesting thing is that we now have talked about hypergamy and hypogamy. We've talked about how to manage that, but we really haven't talked about how to structure this. What do you do when you bring hypergamy and hypergamy together? There's going to be this tension. The problem is that's not natural. We're not bringing fissure elements, nuclear material together. These things should naturally come together very rapidly like magnets. It should be clunk. Okay? Problem is cultures get in the way. Social constructs are getting in the way. And so what we want to look at is how do we actually sit down and kind of structure these? And one of the things I'll sit down and tell you is let's look where we're most successful. I told you we're 500,000 generations deep. What made us successful? And I would sit down and say it's this. It's a preeminent family structure. And it's going to be the Storgic pack groups. The nuclear family, the two parents and the child, extended family as far as the immediate grandparents, aunt, uncles, and all the siblings. Nieces, nephews, that sort of group, caring for each other collectively, okay, meeting survival goals, communal, we're communal creatures, all right, and a division of labor that's sex-based. I know it's sexist, but unfortunately, nature doesn't care, all right? It's biological. We can have human constructs later. The question, though, is why reinvent the wheel when we know this works? Something I like to highlight is the nuclear family is a miniaturized version of this. The problems, though, is the stress and tensions are exacerbated. You don't have the addition of family to rely on. And trust me, grandparents, when you have children, are amazing things. Aunt, uncles, who have a vested interest in family, that genetic line. There's a response mechanism. Interfacial recognition between child and family members is vastly different than caregivers. Right? We have increased failure results because of this added pressure. So if you're only looking at a nuclear family, you're going to have to be prepared to answer this, to make your life easier, to make sure you're more successful. Be aware of that. Extended family is an awesome thing. If you don't have that, you're going to have to reconstitute that somehow or run the natural risk. I'd also sit down and say this, and this is terribly important too. And in society, it's a very, very, very significant one. Parented children thrive. The data is overwhelming. Underparented children are diminished proportionally to the response or lack of parental care. These are some really ugly facts in today's world because most of us are underparented, most of us come from broken homes. And we have organizations like this because of it, where we're trying to self-initiate, self-help, self-improvement. We're having to reconstitute broken families, broken ideas, broken culture, things that were previously present. This is a ramification of this. I'm going to talk about daycare syndrome really quick, and it's actually, I'm going to elaborate a little bit more than that. And you're going to hear me speak probably in the future much more to this. I think there are three things that we can do as humans that will really improve that graphic slide of our ability to actually vastly improve our race and species on a whole. The first one is, I joked about this previously, was to give your child the gift of two-parent privilege. In reality, you want to give your child Storgic privileges, an entire nest, an entire tribe of family supporting them, because it does matter. Giving your child the gift of two-parent family household is absolutely a minimum. The second is, in the first 3 years of life, when children's brains are developing and relating and they don't have communication skills, give them the gift, absolute gift, of a primary care provider. And I know that is going to be incredibly difficult in today's marketplace. But the ability to have a single individual being the consistent caregiver the first 3 years of life, only the first 3, you will see a massive transformation in dependency needs. You'll see a massive transformation in developmental people's empathy's ability and so forth. We'll become more human and more whole because of it. I think a lot of the behavioral issues that we have in our society is resulting from daycare syndrome. There's a lot of research currently undergoing on that. I find that area of study very, very significant. The third is don't hit your children. Teach your children the language other than violence. If it's not okay to hit your employer to hit you, you hit your spouse, people that have recourse, why is it okay to hit a defenseless child? It's not. The other thing what violence teaches is it excludes their ability to imprint positively. Alternative means of communication, behavioral modifications, negotiations, and actually integration and conflict resolution appropriately. And children who don't experience this firsthand through their parents, don't enact that later on in school systems. You have behavioral problems being driven here. So those three things. Give your child storgic privileges of an entire extended family. If you can't do that, minimum make it a nuclear family, two-parent household income. Or I'd say two-parent household. The other is keep your child out of daycare the first 3 years of life. There's no way you're going to be able to outsource better than a mother or a father who loves them. That may mean you become skilled and trained at it. That's your responsibility. The third is don't speak in the language of violence to your children. Don't teach them that language. Ultimately, to raise children outside of the family is to court trauma, is to court disaster, and ultimately tragedy. Here becomes the ultimate question. How do you balance hypergamy and hypogamy? How do you bring the man and woman together? What's the order structure? And then primarily, there's going to be three stories. There's the male hypergamy, the hypogamy-centric. There's going to be the female hypergamy-centric. And then there's going to be a balance imperative. It's kind of a balanced order. Ultimately, when we look at the masculine imperative, this is when we're talking about only the male's actual biological imperatives are being enacted here. We result in this as we call it patriarchy. Okay? And ultimately the results is pretty much civilizations as we know it. All of them. All right. The problem here is that there was a massive shift in our evolutionary history. When we talk patriarchy, a lot of this is in reference to agricultural time periods. There was a shift from when we were hunting and gatherings for 2 to 3 million years to all of a sudden the invention of agriculture and herding. And the significance of that is this concept of stored wealth. And that changed the human dynamic considerably. Out of that did rise a number of civilizations. Okay? We also have, at that time period, all of a sudden totalitarian regimes. We have a class structure within society. And out of that, sexual monopolies. There isn't a major civilization on any continent that didn't involve the sexual monopolization of women based on class, to the extent they became property. All of them. Think of all the world's great historical civilizations. All of them dealt with slavery, dealt with harems sexually. That's going to be an issue here. But the problem is, this works. This is kind of the running model. The secondary one is hypergamy-centric, the matriarchy. So what happens here? Well, we don't have a whole lot of history on this, unfortunately, because a lot of them don't work, but a few of them have risen to the level of mud huts. It's not pretty, okay? It's unfortunate. There may be some really nice civilizations in which women are leading. I don't want to disparage that too much. I kind of like the patriarchal system better. I think I'm terribly biased. I like Western civilization. I like all the merits of that. You don't necessarily see this in matriarchies. The other element is where you have standing civic order and matriarchal influences start to come, you actually start to have civic decay. And we can see that enacting right now today. Look at those governments that are strongly becoming matriarchal, feminine imperative, and what's happening to the social structure. There's a reason why feminists sat down and said, we're out to destroy the patriarchy. We're here to take down fathers. We're here to take down men. Well, ladies, how's that working for you? Okay. The third one is a balance imperative, the natural order of things. What happens when you actually structure this based on evolution? This is the working model. This is the working model for 2.3 million years. Okay, running in before agriculture. We know this works. This is the natural order of things. All right. I'm going to say that's probably a little bit better than the alternative. We don't have a whole lot of current history, modern history, on this acting out. We may want to revisit some of this. There's a reason why I didn't bring up the egalitarian model, where we treat men and women the same, as having the same sexual, natural instincts, same biological impulses. And there's a reason for that. We're sex-based creatures. There's a difference. And based on evolutionary development, we have sex-based derivative behaviors embedded in our biology. Where this works, it's a complete anomaly. It's such an outlier, it doesn't even worth evaluating extensively. People here just aren't happy. Long term, it doesn't work out. Ultimately, we've talked about a number of things. Primarily, this talks about biology. We've talked about your biological imperatives, your natural inclination and demand to reproduce and to raise children. We've talked about sexual selection, how that plays out, and what those are, hypergamy and hypogamy. And then we sat down and said, hey, how do you manage that? Particularly, there's an order, and how do you handle hypergamy and hypogamy individually? And ultimately, we talked about the family groups. What we haven't talked about is what goes beyond biology. Because we're not just biological creatures, we're human. Okay, and there's something that's terribly unique with humans. And ultimately, we're given knowledge, rationality, and free will. And these are terribly, terribly powerful things. In fact, it's the original red pill. This is it. The original red pill. Free will, rationality, and choice of our sexuality, knowledge of it, the knowledge of right and wrong, good and evil, all of it. We've been taught that story, and here it is. Right? I find that remarkable. I also find something else remarkable with this story. It is a story of the lengths man went to the point of defying God, the orthodoxy of the day, to understand women, to be accepted by women. Men would go to the lengths to defy God himself. That is a phenomenal story. That gives me hope. That at our base level, we desire each other so much, we will actually defy the orthodoxy of the day. The only problem is right now, I don't see our partners doing the same thing. I don't see our sexual opposites going to the length of defying orthodoxy for good men. One of the things that will take us beyond our biological imperatives is our civilizing nature, the things that make us human, what brings civilization to order. And these are going to be all the virtuous traits of humanity. I'm going to say we need to lean into those, okay? And when you do, you're ensuring mutual survival. You're ensuring mutual thriving. These are the things that we should be gearing towards. Part of that is, do we understand what relationship skills are? And ultimately, it's not even just a manage of what are relationship skills. Relationship skills at a very basic level reduce anxiety, reduce tension, and remove violence from the equation. Okay? And it's not enough to be aware of these things. You have to be able to have them as skill. Knowledge utilized 1,000 times is a skill. That will serve you. A secondary one is relationship management skills. Do you have the ability to manage a relationship? Why do we actually sit down and want to manage relationships? Because we're looking at performance and effectiveness. We do it in business. We do it in sports. Why are we not doing the same sort of skill training in relationships? We're going to need to do this. And ultimately, it kind of goes back to hypergamous interest. Either you run the relationship, or the relationship will run you. You have a choice. Swallow the knowledge, the truth of reality is that you have a responsibility to do this, or take the blue pill and be ignorant of that reality and live in a fantasy world. But don't be surprised when your family bus careers right off the road. The third one is maintenance skills. Do you have the ability to maintain a relationship? And what we're looking here is that predictability, okay? That we know the relationship's going to operate and be the way we want it to be when we need it to operate, and that reliability that comes with it. And the difference between having a maintenance program within a relationship and not is like any maintenance program. When you don't have a maintenance program, you don't have the ability to care for something to ensure these things, it's a run-to-fail operation. Don't be surprised if you treat your relationships that way, that the relationship doesn't treat you that way. If you don't want to be disposable, make sure you're not. We also have to understand our life arc. Where are we in our life trajectory? There's a complete difference being in your 20s as being into your 40s. And in each kind of 10-year span, within those generational gaps, your focus should be on differing things. And we can talk about that in psychology, social and evolutionary periods. And we also look at, for example, there's a crisis within each age group. That's typical. Kind of figure out what that is, know what that is. But ultimately, I'm going to tell you that your sexual imperative, okay, your biological imperative, is to have children. So it's an obligation that comes with being born. It's natural for the species. If you know that and you want to embrace that and choose to do that, start preparing yourself now. If you're already there, learn to become better at it. Learn to be a better father. But this is going to be a choice you have to make, and it's a very personal one. I know personally I struggled with that for a number of years. I had grave concerns about it. I had to work through that, and ultimately I made a very personal choice. You're going to have to do the same. When evaluating objectives, I'm always reminded of T.S. Eliot. Start with the end in mind. And his quote is that the end is in the beginning. If you wanted to create your life, you're going to have to be an author of it. What story do you want to tell that was your existence? And that's kind of a fascinating concept. If you were a life story, what story would you write for yourself? It's up to you to decide. You become the author of your life. You become the author of your relationship. Look at it. Make sure your short-term decisions are in alignment with your long-term objectives. And when they're matched, you're going to be okay. When they're different, there are going to be issues. Understand that, but you are responsible for controlling it. We also have to look at your responsibility for selection value. I think this is kind of an interesting one. It's one that I think men get hung up on because of sexual criteria. You can remove the risks by knowing. You can't have a guarantee. There's absolutely no guarantee in life, but you can vastly reduce the risk by choosing appropriately. We know life is difficult. Life is incredibly difficult when you're stupid, particularly when you're stupid about it. How are men stupid about it? We don't get rid of drama in our life. We don't remove the negatives out of our life. We can see the shit coming, and we can't fucking avoid it. What does that look like in the sexual marketplace? This guy right here has a problem with massive tits. He can't help himself. I know it. He sees... I understand it's natural selection. Daddy has a taste for candy too. Okay? Problem is, in my age, D became the triple D. Okay? Today, he's telling me G is the new best thing. Okay? When a woman makes herself up to be a sex doll, listen to her, what she's saying. And I'm going to say something kind of interesting. I want you guys to close your eyes. Imagine a sex doll and that woman walking by. Close your eyes and use the power of the Force. Is the dark side strong with that one? Don't touch her. I just did that. Don't make sure, because I can guarantee it. Somebody's actually going to reach out and touch her. Don't make physical contact. But what is the story she's telling you, and how is that going to play out in your life, and how is that going to fucking work? And by the way, I know you love G-size titties. The problem is next year's model are H's. Shit's ass out of control. It's a never-ending cycle, and it's not going to get you really where you want. Be careful about responding only to sexual triggers. All right, I'm going to tell you, look at the package, not just the packaging. You're going to have to train yourself. By the way, it's really hard to do. That was one of the biggest hang-ups I had. Remove the weeds from your own personal garden. The other is nurture the virtuous. Start looking for it. There are virtuous people out there. And when you look for them, you'll start seeing them. And when you see them, feed into that, particularly where it's scarce. All right? And you're going to see a remarkable transformation in your life when you do. Biological imperatives are incredibly powerful forces in nature, and they drive the vast majority of our behaviors. We have to understand them. to actually be able to harness and control them. It's not that we're going to prevent the wind from blowing, but we have the ability to harness the wind. I think it's one of the things that makes us unique. I think it's essential to our absolute fulfillment and thriving as a human species. We also know, for example, our ancestors, it's a lineage that has been passed on to us, and it works. Okay? What we face today is absolutely no different. Life is a continuation of that story. We should be prepared to engage that and continue with that. Ultimately, what I'm professing isn't like in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, where it's a series of steps to the left, okay? And proverbially, you just keep going to the left, you keep going to the left, and ultimately, we end up all in drag, and we pretend that this is normal. Ultimately, what I'm going to be saying is we should be looking at our biological imperatives, the things that we're biologically inclined, because we're biological creatures and we can't change that, to have a solid focus in on that. And then to look at the things that make us distinctly human, to look at the things that made us virtuous, that enabled human thriving, and to bring those two together in ways in which we haven't been successful for going forward. Where we've tried new things and they've been measured and found lacking, we need to discard, but we need to lean into the areas that we've been terribly successful. I believe we can, but it's going to take one bite at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Soc. A little bit tight on time, so one question.
One question.
Then we got to move on. Questions, anybody?
Get to the mic.
One second.
Oh. Yeah, thank you very much. My name is David, and you said there's a time in every man's life, and when things change, you know, the sexuality and nature and procreation in your 20s and 30s and 40s. Okay, so I'm in my 50s. I was married for 25 years, and so my wife took off with somebody on Facebook. Okay, so how do I plan what's my purpose now? According to nature, do I just like go away or something, or what?
No. Actually, it's fair. And I'm the same age as you are. I'm 49. It's nice to sit down and say, if I could roll back time, right? We can't. And so you're stuck with the reality is, I have to start now. And this is the only time period which truly exists, is the moment right now. And so you have to start where you're at. Okay. And then the question is are you in the right context? Okay. You know, am I in the right environment? But I would probably even start internalized. I chose the nomiker Socrates because there were some things that I could relate to. One of the most primary was know thyself. Okay, I felt that was essential to any sort of starting point, is I needed to know myself and start internally and then radiate those elements out. And so I think you have to start now, you know, where you're at, wherever that's at. If you're 25, if you're 30, if you're 60, you have to start with where you're at. You have to understand who you are. What was the process, your personal history that made you up? You know, what were the influences? What were the decisions? You know, to kind of do that kind of forensics autopsy of your life, of the relationships you had that led you there. And I think at 50, there's going to be a large number of it. Part of that, though, is absolutely understanding the element of agency, that you were a part of that through that entire process. And then the question is what's the rest of the story? You have the ability to craft a story and take it as a creative writing exercise. And I find that writing sometimes really helps. You have a period of time that we estimate. What do you want to do with that? How do you want to value? What on reflection will satisfy you personally? Because ultimately, that's the only individual died. Death is going to be a terrible personal thing, whether you're surrounded by family or not. You want to actually go into that grave satiated. Okay, you don't want to be crying and clinging and desperate for life. I hope I slip away gracefully, having no major regrets. And if I have regrets, I hope I had the audacity to face it. I'm on this stage today because I made some profound mistakes. I hurt people. I allowed a relationship continue where somebody didn't maintain my hypogamous interests. It slipped, and I didn't have the ability to communicate it appropriately. And I've said in the past, if you don't have an ability to handle something appropriately, you'll handle it inappropriately. I very much did. Very much did. And a part of what I try to give back is my answer to this. I can't correct the past. I can't say sorry and have it meaningful. But what I can do is, and for reflection, if I ever cross this individual again, I can point to an entire body of work and say, I changed. I took the time for introspection. I took the time for accountability. And I made adjustments not only in my own life, but I shared that knowledge so others who would have been in similar positions don't make the same failings I do. Now, that may not answer your particular question, but I think between now and our deaths, we have at least 20 years, let's say, estimate, to say, what are we going to do now? Start with the end in mind. Look at that 20-year arc and say, where do I want to be? How do I want to exit? And work backwards to today. And then whatever you do, I've talked about goal settings, everything else, put them out. Maintain a Word document. I've done that on a regular basis to help you maintain track. There's no shame in managing your life or relationships, taking notes. In the military, pilots have checklists. I know when I was in the military, I had a cheat sheet in my helmet. Flat out laminated this shit. If something happened, I didn't know to do, can't rely on my head. I whip my helmet, I pull it out, look at the cheat sheet, and know exactly what to do procedurally. Okay? And it was there. Nobody cares if I looked at the cheat sheet. What they cared is I got it done. And they knew they could rely on me to get it done. There's no shame in doing that. I suggest sit down and say, let's be creative. Who do you want to be? How do you want to leave this world? Is there an imprint you want to be? Or do you kind of want to go, so I don't know. But to sit down and say, this is where I'm at, here's where I'm coming, resolve whatever issues that are going to hold you back. Because I would sit down and say probably the thing that I know that holds me back the most is not the external world. It's me censoring myself. And so I would sit down and say, take all those things in light and project that forward. And then be creative with it. Own it. Make art out of it. Don't make it, engineering. I'm an architect by trade, so I'm kind of very, very biased. I want to express, in a building, not just a functional relationship, but I want to sit down and say, what does this thing want to be? What makes it sing? Make sure your life does too. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.